I've never seen this many airplanes in the air at one time before in my life.
Most pilots would have said it couldn't be done. Philip Adair didn't hesitate. He took off expecting an ordinary mission, and within moments found himself completely alone, facing 64 enemy aircraft head-on. No backup, no time to plan, just one pilot, one fighter, and a sky packed with Japanese planes ready to destroy him.
By the time I got up above the bombers, I looked around and there were fighters all over the place.
This is the story of a split-second choice, a reckless-looking maneuver, and a level of raw courage so extreme that it stunned even the U.S. Air Force itself. The alarm that should have sent a squadron. The early morning of December 13th, 1943, did not begin in chaos. It began with quiet tension hanging in the air. This was the China-Burma, India theater of World War II, one of the most dangerous, unstable, and unforgiving fronts of the entire conflict. Everything the Allies were trying to achieve here rested on a fragile thread of air power. Just a few airfields in Assam and northern Burma stood between holding the line and complete collapse. From these airfields, transport planes flew non-stop supply missions over the Himalayas. A merciless route pilots simply called a hump. If those airfields were destroyed, the supply chain would die instantly with them. And the Japanese understood that perfectly. In the weeks before that morning, Japanese air raids had already ripped through the region. Dozens of Allied transport aircraft were destroyed while sitting helplessly on the ground, never even getting a chance to take off. More than 100 personnel were killed. Every successful raid drove home the same brutal lesson. If the response was slow or worse, disorganized, the losses were catastrophic. Out here, there were no do-overs. So when early warning systems detected a large incoming formation just before dawn, alarms were triggered immediately. This was not a drill. It wasn't a small fighter suite meant to probe defenses. Everything in the reports pointed to a major, coordinated raid aimed straight at the airfields and the delicate supply network keeping the entire theater alive. U.S. air combat doctrine was crystal clear from moments like this. You never sent a single fighter. You didn't rely on courage alone. You launched multiple aircraft, attacked in coordinated formations, and crushed the bombers before they reached their targets. Anything less wasn't bravery. It was recklessness. Then the sirens began screaming across the airfield. Ground crews dropped whatever they were holding and ran. Pilots sprinted across dirt strips, boots kicking up dust as engines thundered to life on runways carved straight out of jungle. In seconds, the airfield snapped fully awake. Every man driven by the same urgency, get airborne before the bombers arrived. Philip Adair climbed into his P-40 Warhawk, expecting exactly that, support. Wingmen, a formation rising alongside him. At the very least, a real chance to fight back. There was no time to hesitate. Every second counted. Adair pushed the throttle forward and took off immediately, knowing that even a short delay meant the enemy would reach the airfields untouched. As he climbed, scanning the sky and waiting for familiar silhouettes to rise beside him, one realization struck harder than the vibration of the engine itself. There was no one there, no other fighters climbing to meet him, no squadron forming up behind, no radio calls promising backup on the way. The sky around him was empty, except for the distant enemy formation ahead, and as he continued climbing toward it, the scale of what he was facing became impossible to ignore. This wasn't just danger. It was something far colder than that, a mathematical certainty of death. Why 64 enemy planes meant certain death. When Philip Adair climbed alone toward the distant formation, he still didn't fully grasp the scale of what he was flying into. At the center of the formation were Mitsubishi Ki, 21 Sally medium bombers, the aircraft the Japanese relied on when they wanted to erase runways, fuel depots, and supply hubs in a single devastating strike. These bombers carried heavy bomb loads, flew in tight defensive patterns, and depended on overlapping gunfire to destroy anything that came too close. But the bombers were only part of the danger. Flying alongside them were Nakajima Ki 43 Oscar fighters, fast, aggressive escorts whose sole purpose was to keep those bombers alive. The Japanese didn't assign escorts casually. They organized them in layered formations designed to be nearly impossible to penetrate. Some Oscars flew above the bombers, poised to dive on any attacker. Others stayed below to block escape paths. More fighters guarded the flanks, herding intruders straight into the thickest offensive fire. Together, this created a moving trap with no safe direction of attack. Any pilot trying to reach the bombers first had to survive the escorts. And even if he somehow broke through the fighters, he would then face multiple bomber crews firing in coordinated bursts. That's how the number 64 came together. Roughly 24 bombers protected by 3 to 4 squadrons of fighters, all positioned to defend one another. For a full American squadron, this would have been a high-risk mission. For a single pilot in one P-40, it was pure suicide. Adair had no wingman, no formation, and no altitude advantage against a disciplined, coordinated enemy. That mattered enormously, because in air combat, altitude is life. It gives you speed, energy, and options, everything you need to attack, escape, or survive. Without it, a pilot is fighting uphill in the worst possible way. The P-40 itself was a solid aircraft under the right conditions, but it had clear limitations. It was heavily built and tougher than many fighters, yet that durability came at a cost. At higher altitudes, it was less agile than the lighter Japanese fighters, especially the Oscars circling above the formation. The Warhawk also climbed more slowly, which meant it couldn't quickly gain the height needed to dive into an attack or pull away from danger. And although its guns packed real punch, they carried only a limited amount of ammunition, enough for roughly 12 seconds of continuous fire. In the chaos of aerial combat, that was an incredibly small margin. Japanese escort doctrine exploited all of these weaknesses. Their fighters were trained to let bomber gunfire distract a lone attacker, then close in from multiple directions once that attacker was fully committed. If a single fighter dove in alone to try to break the bomber formation, other fighters were already positioning themselves above and below, waiting to strike the moment the lone aircraft became isolated. With odds like these, the situation was no longer about flying skill alone. It was about the kind of man who would still press forward, and the life that had conditioned him to do exactly that. Forged in Burma, the pilot and the life that removed hesitation. Philip Adair did not suddenly become fearless in the skies over Burma. A man capable of looking at overwhelming odds and acting without pause had been shaped long before alarms ever echoed through the jungles of India. He grew up in Depression-era Oklahoma, a time and place where scarcity was normal and hesitation often meant falling behind. Children learned early that opportunities were rare and second chances even rarer. You didn't stop to overthink, you acted. That instinct, forged in hard years, followed Adair into the cockpit decades later. When the United States entered World War II, Adair enlisted in the Army Air Forces and began flight training in 1942, graduating as a second lieutenant before being sent overseas. Wartime flight school was neither slow nor forgiving. It was intense, demanding, and built to strip away doubt before a pilot ever reached combat. Trainees were pushed relentlessly, taught not only how to fly an aircraft, but how to decide and act under pressure. When lives depended on split-second choices, hesitation simply wasn't an option. After training, Adair was assigned to the 80th Fighter Group, later known as the Burma Banshees, one of the hardest assignments in the U.S. Army Air Forces. The 80th had a reputation for taking on the toughest missions in the China, Burma, India theater, and finding a way to make them succeed. They were the first U.S. fighter unit to resume operations in Burma after the Allied retreat, tasked with protecting the critical supply routes over the Hump and supporting ground forces pushing north. But the CBI theater was no place to ease into combat. Airstrips were carved out of jungle and mud, barely long enough for takeoff, and once the monsoon arrived, visibility could disappear in minutes. Weather alone destroyed aircraft and crushed confidence. Heat and humidity clung to the men relentlessly. Insects were everywhere, and disease posed a threat as real as enemy fighters. Airfields were often nothing more than tents and bamboo structures, and daily life for pilots meant constant alerts, scrambles at all hours, and flying missions while exhausted, dehydrated, and under constant stress. There was no room for comfort, and complacency was deadly. Maintenance crews worked tirelessly, but perfection was impossible. Aircraft often flew with patched bullet holes, engines pushed beyond safe limits. A pilot quickly learned that his plane might not be flawless, but the mission would not wait. You flew anyway. In that environment, hesitation wasn't just a weakness, it was lethal. The rule both on the ground and in the air was brutally simple. Act immediately or die. That rule became part of him. With every mission, every scramble, every distant sound of enemy engines overhead, hesitation faded away. Decisions that once demanded thought became instinctive reactions. By December 1943, when alarms echoed across the Assam airfield, and Adair climbed into his P-40 Warhawk, he was more than just a trained pilot. He was a product of constant pressure and relentless operations. By then, he had flown numerous combat missions, witnessed airfields struck by raids, and seen firsthand what delay and indecision cost. Those months in Burma showed him what bombing attacks did to airstrips, transport planes, fellow pilots, and ground crews. He understood the price of hesitation because he had lived it. Every early morning scramble, every monsoon-soaked takeoff, every close call in the sky, train and act first and think later, because there often wasn't time to do both. That conditioning mattered now, because at altitude, alone above a formation of enemy aircraft that would have driven most pilots to retreat, Adair had only seconds to choose whether he would play it safe or act. The split-second decision that broke all rules. As Philip Adair closed the distance to the approaching Japanese formation, his eyes constantly searched the sky for something. Anything familiar. A flash of metal. A wingtip. A friendly silhouette climbing up to join him. He checked his radio again. Nothing. No voices. No call signs. Just static and the steady vibration of his P-40 cutting through the thin air. The sky around him was empty in the worst possible way. It didn't take long for reality to set in. He wasn't early. He wasn't out ahead of the formation. He was it. The only interceptor standing between a full Japanese strike force and Dinjan airfield, one of the most critical hubs supporting Allied supply flights over the Himalayas. If he waited, even for a moment, the bombers would reach their target untouched. And once they were over the airfield, there would be no stopping what came next. Everything he had ever been taught told him to hold back. Standard U.S. fighter doctrine was clear. Keep your altitude, wait for support, and attack as part of coordinated formation. Lone attacks were discouraged for good reason. They exposed the pilot, burned through limited ammunition, and almost always ended badly. Doctrine existed to keep pilots alive long enough to fight another day, but doctrine assumed time. And time was the one thing Adair didn't have. With every passing second, the distance between the bombers and Dinjan grew smaller. Adair understood the situation better than any manual could explain it. Even if other fighters were scrambling now, they wouldn't reach altitude in time. By the time help arrived, the Japanese bombers would already be overhead, dropping their loads onto parked transports, fuel dumps, and tightly packed ground crews. He had seen the aftermath of raids like that before. He knew exactly what hesitation cost. Aircraft destroyed, lives lost, and damaged the fragile supply chain holding the entire theater together. So the choice in front of him was brutally clear. He could protect his own life and follow doctrine, climb, circle, and wait for support that might never arrive in time. Or he could attack alone, break every rule he had been taught, and try, just try, to disrupt the raid before it reached its target. One choice almost guaranteed survival. The other offered only a slim chance of stopping the bombers, along with a very real chance of never coming back. In that moment, fear was there. Anyone who says otherwise is lying. But hesitation, the thing that killed pilots faster than bullets, was gone. It had been burned out of him by training, by Burma, and by months of living under constant danger. The decision didn't feel heroic to him. It was immediate, instinctive, necessary. Philip Adair pushed the nose of his P-40 down. He didn't ease into the attack. He didn't test the formation or probe its edges. He dove straight and aggressively into the center of it, fully committing himself. This was not how fighter pilots were supposed to fight. It broke every rule designed to keep a man alive in hostile skies. And once the dive began, there was no escape plan waiting on the other side. No promise of a second pass. No guarantee he would ever climb out again. The moment he pushed the nose down, theory ended. What followed unfolded inside a swarm of enemy aircraft, where survival depended entirely on chaos. Inside the swarm, the impossible maneuver. Philip Adair slammed into the Japanese formation at full speed, with no finesse and no backup. Surprise was the only weapon he had left, and he used it instantly. 1 second, the escorts were holding their layered positions. The next, a single P-40 was ripping straight through the gaps between them, forcing split-second reactions instead of allowing planned responses. His angle of attack was critical. Rather than skimming the edges of the formation, Adair drove straight through the escort screen and into the bomber boxes themselves. That decision changed everything. Japanese bombers depended on tight, disciplined formations for survival, using overlapping defensive fire and mutual support. Once that geometry shattered, their protection collapsed with it. Bombers began to break apart, gunners losing coordinated firing arcs as pilots maneuvered wildly to avoid collisions and incoming fire. Adair fired immediately. There was no time for careful aiming or conserving ammunition. His guns flashed as he closed in, and at least one Japanese fighter went down in flames. Several bombers were hit as well, damaged enough to force evasive maneuvers instead a clean, organized run toward Dinjan airfield. In mere seconds, the formation shifted from controlled and orderly to frantic and reactive. The escorts reacted exactly as doctrine demanded, and exactly as Adair expected. Fighters dove down on him from above, while others clawed upward from below, trying to trap him inside the chaos of the formation. Tracer rounds filled the sky, streaking past his canopy like burning wires. His P-40 was hit across the wings, through the fuselage, and into the tail. Metal ripped apart. Control surfaces shook violently, and warning lights flickered. Any less determined pilot would have broken off immediately. Adair did not. Despite the damage, he stayed aggressive, making pass after pass through the shattered formation. He refused to disengage while he still had ammunition. Every attack forced the Japanese pilots to keep reacting, turning, diving, and climbing, instead of stabilizing for a bombing run. That disruption mattered more than pure destruction. Bombers scattered even farther apart. Spacing widened, and timing completely collapsed. What had started as a coordinated strike force became a loose collection of aircraft fighting simply to survive. This was the psychological breaking point. Bombing raids depended on discipline and precision. Once those were lost, their effectiveness dropped sharply. Eventually, reality caught up with him. His ammunition was gone, and his aircraft was battered and barely holding together. Only then did Adair finally pull away, diving out of the swarm with whatever control he had left. And then something unexpected happened. No escort chased him effectively. The Japanese formation was already too disorganized, too scattered, and too focused on restoring order to mount a proper pursuit. The maneuver had worked. What Philip Adair didn't know yet was that the real shock would come after he landed, when commanders fully realized what had just taken place. The shockwave, what happened after he landed. Philip Adair brought his P-40 back to base barely holding together. The aircraft that rolled to a stop on the dirt runway didn't look like something that should have been flying at all, let alone something that had just survived a direct encounter with an entire Japanese strike force. The wings were riddled with holes, the fuselage was torn open, and the tail had taken damage that would have sent many aircraft spiraling out of control. Ground crews stood frozen, staring in disbelief. More than one person would later say the same thing. That plane should never have made it back. Word spread quickly across the airfield. Officers, mechanics, and pilots gathered around a battered Warhawk, trying to understand what they were seeing. One aircraft, one pilot, up against a raid that only minutes earlier had seemed unstoppable. This wasn't how air defense was supposed to work, and yet there it was, sitting on the runway, engine ticking as it cooled. Then the reports began to arrive. Combat assessments confirmed what no one had dared to hope while the alarms were still ringing. The Japanese raid had been broken. The bombers failed to carry out their attack on Dinjan airfield. There was no coordinated bomb run, no transports destroyed on the ground, no fuel dumps exploding in fireballs. The timing had collapsed, the formation had scattered, and the opportunity was lost. The airfield and the supply routes it supported were still intact. Official tallies followed, the kind history usually focuses on. Adair was credited with one enemy fighter destroyed, along with multiple bombers and fighters damaged. On paper, those numbers looked respectable, but they weren't what mattered most. The real result wasn't measured in kills. It was measured in what never happened. No runway was cratered. No transport aircraft burned on the ground. No interruption occurred in the fragile airlift over the Himalayas that kept the China, Burma, India theater alive. Command understood that immediately. This wasn't luck or an exaggerated claim. It was a rare moment where the actions of a single pilot changed the outcome of an entire engagement. Adair's choice to attack alone, against doctrine, against logic, and against overwhelming odds, had bought precious time when time mattered more than anything. The response was swift. Philip Adair was awarded the Silver Star, recognizing not just bravery, but gallantry and action against the enemy. Among fellow pilots, the story spread even faster than the official paperwork. The mission became legendary, not because of a massive kill count or a flawless maneuver, but because of the decision itself. Pilots spoke of that morning as proof that sometimes doctrine couldn't keep up with reality, that sometimes the rule book ended and instinct took over. Adair went on to fly many more missions after December 13, 1943. He survived the war. He lived a full life, but that moment in the skies over Assam defined his legacy. It was remembered as a time when the system failed to produce an answer, and one pilot provided it anyway. This was not a miracle. It was a result of a single pilot, shaped by relentless pressure, refusing to wait, and changing the outcome of a battle in seconds. If stories like this remind you just how far courage can go, don't let this be the last one you hear. Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next unbelievable piece of history. And if you know any other incredible CBI stories, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.